Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. I am the almightyzentaco, and today we're going to be trying something a little bit different. I recently bought GameMaker Studio 2 on sale, so I figured I'd make a simple little game and show you guys how to do the same thing. So, this is what it's going to look like when we're finished. Okay, so as you see, there's this little dude who runs around collecting gems. He also moves with acceleration and deceleration, and he is clamped to the screen, meaning he cannot leave the tops and bottoms of the screen. Also, we have some sound effects playing. So, as you can see, it's extremely simple, not much going on, but this should be enough to kind of give you the gist of how to work within GameMaker Studio 2. So let's go ahead and get started by selecting New. Alright, so we now have two options. There's drag and drop and GameMaker language. I tried drag and drop, gotta say, not a huge fan. I found it actually pretty confusing compared to the GameMaker language. It was kind of hard to figure out where things were at and it got really cluttered. So I recommend GameMaker language, and that's what this tutorial is going to be about. So if you're interested in looking at drag and drop, you're going to have to watch a different tutorial. Alright, so here is where we get to name our project. We'll call it tutorial game. So here it is. We have created a new project. So right now we're looking into a blank workspace. The workspace is where we can look at different components within the game, such as sprites and objects, or even the room. And we can have multiple workspaces. You can just click on this plus here, and we can make all kinds of them. We can also get rid of them and rename them by double-clicking on them. Well, it's supposed to be double-clicking, but sometimes I have to like quadruple click. I don't think I'm clicking on the right spot or something. Come on.
Do it!
Seriously? Come on.
Just do it!
There it is. Okay. I can test, whatever. But we only need one for right now. Okay, so if you look to the right, you will see a resource list. This is where all of the resources for your game are going to be sorted at. And GameMaker will sort them by default into types, which is pretty cool. So to make this game, we're going to need a few things. We're going to need some sprites, and we're going to need some objects. We're just going to have a single room. So let's make a new sprite now. So what you do is you right-click on Sprite and select Create Sprite. Now this brings up the sprite editor. Top left is the name. Let's rename this to sprite_player. Now here's where we can control the width and the height. Here is essentially this is the hotspot. You can set it manually by dragging. You can type in the number for the origin, or you can select it from a list. That's probably the easiest. We're going to do that. We're going to do middle center. Now our sprite is blank, so we're going to need to either import or edit an image. So we're going to edit. So, holding control, and you can use the mouse wheel to zoom out. That's pretty handy. And for our purposes right now, we're just going to make a square. I don't really like the color of that square. We're going to make it a different color. When you're finished editing your image, just select the X here. It'll close out the tab. Close it out again. And our sprite is finished. Now we're also going to need an object. So right-click on Objects, Create Object, and this is going to be our player. We're going to call this obj_player. And we need to associate a sprite with this player, otherwise the object will be invisible. So we're going to go ahead and select under where it says no sprite. We can select that to get a list of sprites. We just have one, so select that. So now I've associated this player sprite with the player object. And you can do a lot of stuff here. You can mess with the collision mask. You can actually give it a different collision mask other than the sprite it has, which I think is pretty handy. And also, you can mess around with like the physics and stuff, uses physics, blah, blah. We're not going to do that. Okay, so we are in the events right here. And this is where we're going to actually put the code for our game. We're going to put the script inside of the player object because that is the simplest thing right now. So add an event, and we're going to need two different types of events. We're going to need the create event. So boom. When we select that, it opens up our coding interface, so we can type in our code here. Code, you know. But anyway, so what the create event does is this will trigger whenever the object is created. So we're going to drop it into the room initially. So as soon as the frame starts up or the room starts up, this object will be created and this code will initialize. This is where you want to declare your variables and set up your default variables and strings and whatnot. So that's why we're going to need that. But to do the bulk of the work, we're going to need what is called a step event. So select add event, and we want the step. Now there are three steps. There's step, begin step, and end step. Begin step happens at the beginning of step, end at the end, and step is just the step. So what is the step event? Well, the step event is essentially an always event. It is happening always. So all the code you have in here, it's going to cycle through this every single time, and that is how your game is going to essentially be created. So let's do some stuff here. Let's start really basic, and we'll sort of layer on more complex concepts as we go. All right, so let's go to the create step. Now in GameMaker language, you need to declare a variable before you can use it. So let's go ahead and declare a variable. Input underscore x equals 0. So what are we doing here? Well, we've created a variable called input underscore x, and we've set it to 0. That lets GameMaker language know that it is an integer, not a float. We could have done like 0.1 or even a string. But we're not doing that. We're just going to make it 0. And for now, that's all we need to do. We have declared our variable. So now let's update that variable. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug into the variable whether or not we are pressing right on the keyboard. So we're going to do that this way. We're going to say input underscore x equals. A single equal sign is a declaration. Double equal signs is a question. So if I said input underscore x equals 1, and you need to make sure that you end that with a semicolon, that would be setting it to 1. If I did this, that's a question. That's saying, is this equal to 1? And you would need to preface that with an if statement. But right now, we're just going to set this to something. So we're going to set input underscore x to be keyboard check. And then we're going to need some parentheses. And inside the parentheses, we're going to check to see which key is being pressed. So we're going to find out if the keyboard is pressing right. And you do that with vk underscore right. Close that off with a parentheses. And then end it with a semicolon. Semicolon is how you let GameMaker language know that that is a complete thought, you are done. So what is this doing? Well, this is essentially checking to see if we are holding right on the keyboard. If we are, it's going to set input x to 1 because 1 is the same as true. And if we're not, it's going to set it to 0 because 0 is the same as false. Okay, keyboard check is just a bit of code that checks to see if the keyboard button is being pressed, and then whatever you put in parentheses is the button that it's checking. So if you have any questions or you're ever confused about syntax, you can double click with the middle mouse on some code here. It'll open up the help and it'll tell you exactly what it does. Keyboard check returns whether the given key on the keyboard is currently held down. So if the right key is being held down, this is going to be true. VK right, that stands for virtual keyboard. That just means the right arrow button. Okay, so now we're going to do the basic way we kind of make things happen in GameMaker language, and that is the if statement. So we'll find out if input x equals, and this is double equals because it's an if. That's how you ask. If input x equals 1, which would be true, then we're going to do something. And you do something, you let GameMaker language know you want to do something by using curly braces. So here's 1, there you go. Anything in between that will do stuff. So this is what we do. You know, that's not going to do anything, but whatever's between here, and you can do a bunch of lines. You could be like, do this too. And then you could also say if, you know, input x is greater than 5. I don't think that could be true. And then you could do something else. So you can stagger all these logical statements, these ifs, these ors, these whatever. And this is how we can do really complex stuff within GameMaker language. Anyway, so if it is equal to 1, we're going to move right. Okay? So we do that this way. We'll say x equals x plus 5. Now, since we're saying x is the x position of the current object. The current object is the player object because that's the one we're calling the code from. So there you go. Now, that will set x to x plus 5, but there's shorthand for this. So you can type it this way if you want, but you could also say x plus equals 5. Make sure you close it off with a semicolon. Plus equals is the same as saying itself plus. So it's just shorthand. Let's go ahead and test it and see if I did this correctly. Whoops, nothing is happening. That's because we didn't actually put anything into the room. So double click the room. It'll open it up into a new workspace. And go ahead and just grab the object, the player object, and drop him in. Any object that's not dropped in or is not in the frame, its code is not going to run. So let's try that one more time. Okay, when I press right, he goes. Now, this is actually not the best way to do this. I just want to illustrate how you can have an if statement. Here's a better way to do this. Let's delete this if statement. Okay, so we know that we are always setting input X to the state of keyboard check VK right. So this can be 1 or 0. Now we want to find out if the player is holding, like which direction he's holding. And so he could be holding right or left. And we want him, if he's holding left, we want the value of input X to be -1. If he's holding right, we want it to be 1. And we can do that this way. We can set input X to the value of keyboard check VK right minus keyboard check VK left. And let's go ahead, without having to move the thing, let's go ahead and just quickly look and see if this did what we wanted by using the debug console. So we can say debug, no, that's not right, it's show debug message. And we want to show the value of input underscore X. Close it off with a semicolon. Now this should return 1 or -1 depending on which way we are pressing. Okay, if we look down at the bottom, near the output down here, it'll show us whatever we put to that debug console. So it is working. We have -1 and 1. It also can be 0, which is perfectly fine. Now, the reason this works, obviously, is if we are holding left, then keyboard check VK left will be true, so that will return 1, but we're subtracting that. So we'd actually be subtracting 1, so that'll give us a -1. So if we were only holding left, the value is -1. If we were holding only right, well, keyboard check will be 0, so it'll be 1 minus 0, which is 1. And if we're holding both of them, it'll nullify it. Okay, now we need to update the player position based on this, and we'll do that this way. We'll just always set X to plus equals, and we're going to say 5 times input underscore X, semicolon. So depending on which way we're holding, this is going to move the player by 5 per cycle. All right. Let's go ahead and give them an up and down movement too. So let's input this here. We'll need to declare a new variable. So go back to the create event, call it input Y. We'll set that to 0. And now back on the step event, let's update it. So input Y is going to equal keyboard check. Now up is negative and down is positive. So we're going to say VK down, I think this is going to be right, minus keyboard underscore check VK up. And then Y is plus equals 5 times input Y. Let's give it a test. All right, so now we can move our characters slowly around the screen. But you know, this is kind of crappy. We can do a lot better than this. So we can add an acceleration, we can add a max speed value, all kinds of stuff. Now, here's something I recommend. While you can declare all your variables in the create step, that means if you want to do any changes on the fly for initializations, you're going to have to actually crack open your code and find it and then change it. But you can also go to variable definitions here under the object, and you can create variables that way, and then you can modify them here. So for example, let's make one here. We'll call it Excel real. We'll have it a real number. Real number is float. And we'll say 0.5. Now we'll add another one, and we're going to say decay. We're going to make that 0.9, no, 0.8. The decay value is going to be the value by which we're going to bleed off movement speed. So we have acceleration and decay. What else do we need? We need a max value. So just say max speed, and we'll say 10. We're going to clamp it to be that speed. So we don't even have to declare these then inside of the start create event. So this is another way to do it. And also this is pretty handy because, like I said, you can just see it at a glance and modify it. Okay, so we're going to have to do something a little different. I was just using this to show you simply how this is going to work, but we're not doing it this way. So go ahead and delete that. Go back to the create step, and we need to declare two more variables. We're going to declare an x speed, set it to 0.0, so it's a float, and a y speed. Now that those are declared, we can now use them. Okay, so what we're going to do essentially is we're going to add the acceleration value, which we have set currently to 0.5. We're going to add that to our x speed and y speed values times the direction. So if we're holding right, it's going to constantly add the acceleration to the x speed, allowing us to amp it up. We're also going to clamp it though with the max speed value, and we're going to apply the decay when we're not pressing the buttons so that it slows down and stops. So here we go. So we're going to set x speed plus equals accel, which is the acceleration value, and we're going to multiply that by input underscore x. So that's going to essentially accelerate x speed in the direction we are pressing. Let's do the same thing for y speed plus equals accel times input y. There we go. Now we need to update the x and y position. So that's x plus equals, and we're going to say x speed and y plus equals y speed. So what we're doing is setting x to x plus x speed and y to y plus y speed, thereby changing their positions. Let's go ahead and check it and see if it works. It should, unless I screwed something up. There we go. Now, as you see, it's very floaty and it doesn't decay, so we need to set up those decays right now. We want to update the position last after all the logic is done, so let's go ahead and put a big space here. And now here is the part where we're going to decay the values. Now, we don't actually need to decay these until we are not holding the buttons, the directions, because otherwise you're fighting the decay while you move. So we're going to do that this way. If input x equals 0, so that means we are not holding left or right with the x, with the left and right keys, then what we're going to do is we're going to bleed the value of x speed. So x speed, and then it's times equals, so that's times itself. It equals itself times, and we are going to use the decay value. It's as simple as that. Now we're going to set up an if event for the input y, and it's going to be the exact same thing. If it equals 0, meaning we are not pressing anything, then y speed is going to, we're going to say y speed times equals decay. Okay, so now we need to do one more thing. We need to clamp the values of x speed and y speed so they don't go over our max speed value. And we do that this way. We're going to say x speed equals clamp. And so how clamp works is we're going to need, let me double check actually. So it's clamp value min max. All right. So it's clamp and the value is x speed. That's what we're clamping. And the minimum is going to be negative max speed. And the top speed is, the top value is max speed. I think that's what it's called, right? MAX SPD. Okay. We need to do the same thing for y speed. Set it to clamp y speed, negative max, and max speed. So that'll clamp it off at negative 10 and 10 currently, but you can modify that to be whatever you want. So now we should have that clamp in there. Let's test it. Okay, perfect. But we also want to make sure we can't get off the screen, and we're going to use clamp for that as well. So we're going to clamp it last. We're going to say x equals clamp, and the value is x. The minimum value is going to be 0, and the max value is going to be room width. Now we're going to clamp the y. Y equals clamp that's the y value, and it's going to be 0 room height. So now it should be clamped and we should not be able to leave the room. Let's find out. Okay, can't get off the screen there. Can't get off the screen there. Can't get off the screen there. And I can't get off the screen at the bottom. So we have succeeded. The player movement is essentially done. We will need to do animations later, but for right now, that's all we need. Okay, so now we're going to need to create the collectible. So we're going to need a sprite for that and an object. Go to the sprites and select create sprite. We're going to call this SPR gym. And I'm just going to edit the image and make some kind of really chintzy looking gym. Okay, now we need to make a gym object. So create another object, obj underscore gym, and select the gym sprite. I'm not going to add any events here. We don't need to declare any variables or anything for this. We're going to make sure all of our code is inside of the player. All right, so let's go ahead and generate a bunch of random gyms. So go back to the player, and we're going to do this on the create event. So select the create tab. Let's make a comment. You do that with slashes. All right, so we're going to say spawn gyms. Okay, so we're going to declare a temporary variable here. We're going to call it I. So var I equals 0. We're going to do a while event. So while I is lower than random 30. Okay, so this is going to run as long as I is lower than random 30. So it will create a random value out of 30 between, I suppose, 1 and 30 or 0 and 29. I'm not sure how GameMaker does that. And then it's going to run that loop until it reaches that value. Okay, so we're going to do something. So we do need to put the brackets in. And the first thing we're going to do is say I plus equals 1 so that it increments up so that this will not run forever. And then we're going to create a sprite, or not, we're going to create a gym. So that's instance create depth. So we're going to, for the X, we want a random X and Y position. So for the X, we're going to say random, and we're going to get the room width. And then for the Y, we're going to get a random room height. That'll give us, so this is going to give us between 0 and the width of the room, and 0 and the height of the room. And then it is the layer, we're going to say 1, and then finally it's the object, which is obj underscore gym. Right, so we have X position, which is the random room width, Y position, which is the random room height, the depth, which is 1, and the object name, which is object gym. Close that off with semicolon. All right, so it should create a bunch of these. Let's go ahead and see. There we go. They are all created. Oh, one more thing. Go back to the sprite gym. Let's make sure we center that in the middle center for the origin point. All right, so now we need to allow the player to collect them. So I'm going to go ahead and comment a section out so we know where we're at. And we're going to say collect gyms. So we're going to do that this way. There is a bit of syntax called instance place. All right, so let's look at it. So this can check for a collision between the current object and the instance at the meeting place you specify. So we're essentially saying, is there an instance colliding with this object we're using at the X and Y position we specify, and this is the object name. And it's going to return either the ID value of that object that we are colliding with, or the keyword no one. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So we're going to do this. We're going to set up a temporary variable, which we're going to call I, and we're going to make it equal to instance place. The x position is our current x, the y position is our current y of the player object. And then the object name that we're checking against is obj_Jim. So this value is going to if we're not colliding with anything, this variable I is going to equal no one. If we are colliding with something, it's going to be equal to the instance ID that we're colliding with. And the reason we're doing that is because if we just destroy the objects by name, it's going to destroy all of the gems instead of the specific gem we're colliding with. So this is how we're getting around that. So now we need an if event. If I does not equal no one, so exclamation mark equal no one, meaning we are colliding with something, then just sorry, that's backwards. Instance destroy, and the instance we're going to destroy is the value of I. All right, I think that worked. Let's check it out. All right, so we can now collide with these and destroy them. Player's a little slow. Let's go ahead and speed him up. And we can do that simply by selecting our variable definitions, and let's increase the max speed to like 20. We could also increase the acceleration to like 0.8 so it matches the decay. Okay, so we can destroy the gems. Now we need to allow the player to win, and we're going to do that. Win the game. We're going to win the game simply by finding out if there are no gems left. If there are no gems, we're going to restart the frame. So we'll do that this way. If instance number, now we need the name of the instance object, which is object gem. If that equals to 0, then we want to room restart. Make sure you put parentheses around this. Make sure you got your brackets. Okay, so whenever there are no gems, then we're going to restart the room. Let's see if that works. And it works. Now, you did probably notice that was a little bit jarring, so we're going to want to have a slight delay. So we'll do that this way. All right, so click on the create event. We are going to declare a variable. We're going to call it inTimer. And we're going to set that to 0. So this is just going to be a variable we're going to add to until it reaches the number we want, and then we're going to restart the frame so there's a delay. So delete room restart, we don't want to do that yet. Instead, we want to find out if the number of gems is 0. Then we're going to set the value of endTimer to itself plus 1. So plus equals 1. So if endTimer equals 100, then we're going to restart the frame. Room restart. Okay, perfect. All right, let's add some sound effects. So let's do that this way. You click on sounds under the resource tab, create a sound. We're going to call this sound collect, and then you select the ellipses to choose a file. Now I got some sounds somewhere on my computer. Let me find them. Okay, I'm going to select a sound effect called coin. Then I'm going to make another sound for the music. Sound, song, BG song. And one more song. One more sound. This is going to be end song. All right, so we got these 3 sounds now: a collection sound, a background song, and an end song. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to do is to start that background song. So go back to your code, and we're going to do that on the create event. So the way we play that song is this way. We're going to type audio play sound. And let's see, look at the syntax. We're going to need to have the index, the priority, and whether it's looping or not. So an example would be the name of the sound, that's the index. Then the priority, I believe the smaller the number, the higher the priority, and then whether it's looping, false or true. Okay, so the sound we want to play is sound, BG song. Priority is 1, and true, we want it to loop. So that's going to play the song. Now we also want to play the sound effect for collecting gems, and we want to do that where we collect the gems and destroy the instance. So just go ahead and add another line there, and that's audio play sound. And that was sound collect 1 false. We do not want it to loop. And lastly, we want to play the end song, but we want to clear the sound effects first. So whenever, we'll do it this way. We'll say if end timer equals 1, so it's just started. Audio stop all. That'll stop all the sound effects and all the music, and then audio play sound in song 1 false. We don't need it to loop. Alright, so that should be everything we need to do except for make the animations. Let's make sure I didn't do this wrong. Okay, so we have all these audio playing over itself. So the first thing we want to do then is on the create event, before we play the background music, we're going to go ahead and stop all the sound effects. So in case anything is still playing, it will stop. So that's audio stop all. Okay, that should fix that problem. All right, so we got one last thing to do, and that is to animate the player. So let's edit the sprite player. So I'm going to select image, import images. Now I got to find my exported image. I'm going to select all 3 frames of this. Actually, I'll select them all. Okay, I'm going to resize the canvas. And for some reason we have this leftover initial frame. I don't want it, so you can select the X to just delete it entirely. It's a little bit out of order. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so that's done. I have an imported animation. And so here's how I'm gonna do this animation. It's gonna be really simple. I'm just going to set the animation speed based on the absolute value of the X and Y speed, and I'm gonna modify that. So we control the animation speed this way. It's image speed. So we're going to set that equal to the absolute value of X speed plus Y speed. And I want to make sure that it's going to be way too fast, so I need to slow it down. So I'm going to multiply that by 0.05. I think that'll roughly do it. Let's find out. All right. So now we have an animation. Alright guys, well, that pretty much covers it. This is how you make a really simple little game in GameMaker Studio 2. I hope you guys found this video educational. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below as always. Also, if you need some help, please join my Discord channel. Link is in the description. And I'm thinking about doing some more of these GameMaker Studio 2 tutorials as I kind of figure out how it goes. I'm kind of a noob at it myself, but I figure every time I learn something interesting, maybe I'll just make a video for you guys. Alright everyone, thank you for watching this video, and until next time, have a fantastic day.